So I'll pass it over to you, Guy, to introduce yourself and then over to the panelists for their introductions and start the session.
Oh, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, let's just do some quick intros first of all. My name's Guy Griffiths from GGFit, and we help people to get fitter and healthier by working with clubs on member engagement and retention. And I'm going to throw across to Andy next for an intro.
Hi there, I'm Andy Glover. So I work as head of customer experience at Places Leisure. So we look after around about 100 leisure centres and 5 private gyms. I look after the customer insight, customer service team, and internal comms as well.
Cool. Thanks, Andy. And David?
Yep. Hi, guys. My name's David Hopkins. I'm the MD and founder of Proinsight, one of the UK's leading mystery shopping companies. And we work primarily in the UK's health and fitness sector. So most of kind of mystery shopping, most of the UK's leisure centres and gyms and spas. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. And then Paul?
Hi everyone, Paul Roberts, co-founder of My Customer Lens, which is an all-in-one customer insight platform. So we help operators to make customer insight their competitive advantage.
Brilliant. So thank you, everyone. This was a scheduled event at the Real Elevate conference this year, and I've chaired a couple of debates like this the last couple of years. I'm always interested in chairing a discussion and getting questions from the floor, albeit the virtual floor today. So what I always encourage is for the panelists to talk for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, which we'll do today in a bit of a Q&A, and then we'll go into some other questions. But if you've got questions for any of the panelists or for me or for Lucy, then please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll try and pick them out as we go along. So any discussion or debate that you want to get going, please drop them in there. And yes, as Lucy says, it is the session is recording. To kind of open it up, I always talk about feedback in quite simple terms, with 3 points, talking about asking members or customers what they think, and then you score more points by then telling them what they think. So giving them feedback and showing that you are actually listening to them, not just answering the questions. And then, as I say, in my simplistic terms, part 3 is then tell them what you're doing about it. So the things that you are responding to, tell them that you're doing that. Maybe even the things that you're not responding to, tell them why not. But that's a very simple feedback strategy. We've got some real experts here that hopefully we've got some good questions for. And let's start with Andy from Places. Let's start with the why before we get onto the how and the what of feedback. It's an obvious question probably, but why do Places put so much emphasis on customer feedback?
Yep, so I think we've got, there's probably 5 main reasons that everyone would be familiar with, and then I've got kind of 3 or 4 that might spark a little bit more interest as to why we do things the way we do. So I think the ones that are a given for almost anyone on the call, it is the usual. So retention is cheaper than acquisition. So obviously looking after your members is cheaper. Acquisition itself is more competitive than ever, and I think we have to remember in leisure that you can be active without paying a penny to a leisure operator. You can go on a park run, you can simply go for a jog around the block or what have you. So it's competitive in more than just direct debit and membership ways. Customers trust recommendations. I think we all know that. That's a bit of a given. Their recommendations are more trusted than adverts. So that's always good to know what your customers are saying. And that's where NPS measures and what have you come in. Probably for the business and leisure, in my world is making decisions on insight rather than instinct. So we've got some great operational and experts in their fields in my office, but just occasionally customers will validate that thinking, or they might challenge it a little bit. So actually you're basing your thoughts on those of your customers, and it's quite a nice time to introduce something called the customer chair. So I'm never sure whether this is anecdotal or a bit of a myth, but in the world of Amazon, by all accounts, they have a chair, an empty chair in every meeting that represents the customer. So I guess in Places Leisure, that is often me. But I am always more useful when I'm sort of armed with stats, facts and figures from what could be thousands of customers rather than just, I don't know, an individual tweet or one letter that we've received or an email or what have you. So it's really basing it on fact. And obviously when you get to high response rates and more immediate feedback. That always helps me represent the customer correctly. I get most things right. I think customers are relatively easy. They want things to work. They want things to be fair. And if you drop the ball, they want you to sort it out as quickly as possible. It's relatively simple stuff, but prioritizing some of that work is helped by the feedback. The gist of the customer chair and the gist of anything really is to get ourselves closer to the customers, especially in a 100 centre estate. I don't talk to them all, the frontline teams do, but the more I can sort of close that gap and represent what the frontline teams are experiencing to the business, the more useful I am. Probably the four more thought-provoking areas is one I would call is immediacy. So customers are very close to your business, whether you think so or not. So whether that's Twitter or Facebook, whether that's Googling your CEO's email address, it's pretty easy for them to feedback in a way that they want to. And sometimes that may not always be the way you'd want them to. So therefore, in the world of surveys, we've moved all of our surveys from quarterly to daily. And that doesn't mean we email every customer every day, but it does at least give us a chance for customers to feedback quickly. And perhaps, in an area where we may have dropped the ball, it would be nicer to hear about it via a survey and get back to the customer within 24 hours than it would be to see it on Twitter. So there's some obvious stuff in there that customers are close to your business, and nothing is quicker than Googling your CEO's email address or Twitter. So you have to get as close to that as possible. Second one is expectations. So I think, in a commercial world, most people worry about what the competition are doing, and I think that's very important. But customers' expectations are these days very, very high, and often they're not comparing you to your rival, they're comparing you to the best in class. So our app isn't compared to other leisure operators' app, it's compared to the 5 or 6 ones that you use on your phone. You are probably not using another leisure operator's app, so that becomes a challenge in our buildings. We've got cafes. Well, you are not saying to me as head of customer experience, it's okay that the cafe experience isn't very good, because we appreciate you've got 9 other activities that you need to be good at as well. You compare it to your last coffee, which is a Starbucks, which is a Costa, or what have you. So you're up against sort of global players. In the digital sphere, you are up against expectations from the BBC iPlayers of the world, Ticketmasters, Amazon, Facebook, all of that sort of stuff. People want things to work, so expectations are higher. And if those companies are spending lots of money on improving their experiences, then all of those expectations filter down to your own digital and site experiences. So I think that's higher than ever. Prioritization is the third one. So really what's at the top of the customer's list needs to be at the top of yours. So I wouldn't say we're the finished article in customer experience, and probably no one ever is these days, but I can safely say that the top 6 or 7 customer issues that we would hear about, I can point towards a project, an investment, or something in the business that will look to address that. So I'd be fairly confident that if a customer reaches my customer service team, we can at least explain the solution and the steps we're putting in place, which is back to Guy's point. It's very simple, is let customers know what it is you're doing. And then the final one is mindset. So actually, I've worked in businesses where there's a bit of a tick box exercise. You checked in, you had an NPS score, you popped it on a graph. 3 months later, you popped it on another graph. The upline was always, someone could take credit for it, and you could pretty easily find an excuse for the down graph. Often it's the weather. So it's therefore something that's out of your hands. When actually, if you've got a degree of curiosity and you want to get better, you should ask a question, or you should only ever ask a question with a view that you want to improve that one. And then mindset, and I think David perhaps will touch upon this within Mystery Shop, is to get the buy-in from the teams that we're going out and looking for positives. Is whether it's a survey or a mystery shop, we always ask a really simple question, which is, did anyone offer you outstanding service? If so, let us know why, let us know their name, and we'll pass that on. So in the world of surveys, we get 10,000 thank yous in a year across swim lessons, across membership. So that is more than one for everyone we employ. And for the teams and the managers, one of the great joys of the job, I'm sure, in running a big leisure centre, which is a pressurised job, is that you've got basically a 2-second job to download all of your thank yous on the back of every survey and go and share those with the teams. And that it really is, I think, in the world of Mystery Shop especially, we're out to really hear the good stuff as well. And customers do, in their thousands, literally tell us, I'd love to thank that. And in our reopening recently, the dynamic has completely shifted to thanking the whole teams, because I think that, the customers now appreciate what an effort it has been to mobilise the centres, get them safe, offer that reassuring environment. And, it's not been easy for teams the last 4 or 5 months. So that simple question gets you, you know, a huge leap forward in the buying of the teams and the customers. You're asking them about something that they would love to share with you. Well, actually, that helps with response rates. It helps you, to me, feel genuine. So that's kind of the reasons we do it, and they're all sort of playing out in improvements for customers.
Cool. And I think that's really important. If people take one thing away so far, or even from the whole thing, it's that if you ask for feedback, a lot of it will be positive. Right, and people want to give that positive feedback. They're just looking for, people aren't going on to Twitter necessarily or looking for the CEO's email address to say thank you, are they?
No,
probably doing that for other reasons. Whereas if you're saying give us some feedback and great reports from reopening, I don't want to thank anyone specifically. I want to thank everyone at the site, which is good. And does that lead to my next question, going on from the why into the how? How do you get 1 in 5 of your members filled in feedback? 30,000 responses during lockdown.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that other than giving them the opportunity to say thank you?
Yeah, the lockdown survey was immense. So every day we clicked on it, we were just astonished by the response. And I think the response to that is that we change our surveys so they are bespoke. So perhaps the jewel in the crown of our customer insight at the moment is the surveys. So we've changed them 3 times in the last 6 months. There was the conventional, what you'd call in-life survey. Then we had a lockdown survey, which was largely saying, look, we think this is what the government are going to do. We think these are the timescales. We think this is what we want to put in place, and also what the sector guidance says we should put in place. But we want to know what you think about it. Now, at a time when customers weren't paying us a penny, I guess the timing is everything, and I guess the intent is everything, because of our previous surveys where we do get back to customers, we do feed back to them, and the frontline teams especially put in an incredible amount of work to get back to the negative comments and even the green flags, which is what we call the thank yous. Is we will often drop the customer an email, say really appreciate the thanks, we've just passed that on to the team. Not a huge job, but nevertheless in the course of running a leisure centre, it is work. So I think we have the buy-in of customers. 30,000 is probably not what we would have thought we would get. We had cancelled customers responding to us telling that, look, we had cancelled, but we're all ears on coming back. Cancellation was just our way of suspending. It's just a different term for them. And then I think the intent was we were genuinely curious. So I think something that Paul might touch upon is curious is a word I've sort of borrowed from him actually. So we ask questions that we're interested in finding out. So if you just sort of limit yourself to asking an NPS score and saying, well, we're a 6 out of 10, and then going, we don't really know why, what's the point, or is there just one verbatim comment you have to sift through to work out why, then you don't get very far. But if you relate it to the fact that it's important, and let's go and ask people, our surveys begin with, what is it you do at the centre? So if you tell us you swim and you don't go to the gym, we won't ask you any gym questions. If you say you don't use the changing rooms, we won't bother you with that. And the surveys as well, we never ask you your age, your gender, or your membership type, because we know that in the background. So if you ever do a survey that asks you those 4 or 5 things, you've got yourself a bit of a waste of time for customers, and it's not as well designed a survey as you think, because you're largely asking them to tell you information you know already. So we can link a lot in the background. So I think the genuine intent and the user experience, but I think the timing was right. We hit upon a time where customers were genuinely thinking, okay, we're interested in your thoughts. Our COO, Chief Operating Officer John, regularly posted updates on the website saying, this is our thinking. We're largely waiting for the government. This is the sector thinking, but we're really keen on your thoughts. And then in his next update, it would include a lot of the survey results. So people were kind of thinking, on back to Guy's point, we were talking, we were genuinely listening, and it was a conversation. It wasn't just a number on a bit of paper or a sort of a token gesture. So that, it's astonishing response. That, the reports are widely available, so we're always happy to send anyone a copy. But in terms of just looking out for customers, it was hugely well received. So.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let's come back onto the what you do with the feedback, which I think is part of the meat. But moving around the Zoom room and talking to David for a minute, you get really specific feedback on certain parts of the process, or sometimes sales, sometimes the member journey for your clients. Why do Proinsight's clients want that kind of information? Because it's not just about getting the process right, is it? Or is it?
No. I think look, first of all, we measure it in any customer experience. We do that across 10 different sectors. So health and fitness is just one sort of sector within that. But I think whether it's health and fitness or outside of that, I think it probably comes down to sort of three reasons why people are wanting to measure the customer experience. And I think the first one is around compliance. So compliance to a regulation, perhaps like with car dealerships. We work with a lot of car dealerships, and they're looking at how they adhere to FSA regulations. So they need to adhere to these regulations, otherwise they'll get fined. So organisations like Mercedes, BMW that we work with are very keen to find out whether or not they're adhering to those regulations, how they're presenting housing retailers and the like, are sort of interested in how their salespeople are presenting sort of government schemes like Help to Buy and things like that. And our sector, I think, has moved into that direction now, much more so than in the past. So health and fitness clients are now much more interested in how they're delivering their COVID measures. So if the UK Active and the government have agreed these set of measures, how are our sector delivering that? So that's, I would say that was a compliance kind of, which our sector hasn't done a lot of, but it's certainly moving in that direction. The second area, or the reason why people are measuring using mystery shopping, I think, is around brand experience. And these are sort of a couple of brands that we work with specifically on this, but these are brands like Gymbox, and who is sort of, their slogan or tagline is, the last thing will ever be is boring. And if you've been to a Gymbox club, or you've sort of seen Rory or any of the guys Mark talk, that's sort of ingrained, in them. And so their mystery shop is very much sort of, less process, more around the culture. If someone's going in, what's the experience like? What's the mystery shopper thinking when they leave? And that's sort of really important to a brand like that. Is the information being, is the vibe being pushed through to the consumer? And then David Lloyd's another example of an organisation that hasn't sort of necessarily got doesn't push a lot of process through their mystery shops, but is much more interested in the consumer and whether they believe that they're getting a premium experience. And then the final example of a client that's sort of looking at a brand experience is someone like Carpetright, who, I don't know if any of you bought carpets, but these guys are trying to reshape how you buy carpets and building a relationship where you only will ever go back to Carpetright. And their slogan is Carpetright's for life. So you keep buying your carpets throughout your home buying journey, and that's sort of the direction of travel for those guys. And I think the third group, or reasons why people are measuring customer experience, is around sort of some kind of process delivery. So some examples in this space would be the British Army, who we work with, where there's quite a long process. They have over 100,000 applicants every year that inquire to join the army, and they have to get that down to 6,000 soldiers, and we help them with that process. And very, very sort of regimented process to sort of to follow. And they know if they get the process right, that 100,000 will get to 6,000. If they get it wrong, the 100,000 soon ends up at 2,000, and there's a disaster as far as that business is concerned. And then Crossrail, we do a lot of work with Crossrail, the tube line across London. And if they don't follow their process, then when TfL measure the process on their behalf, they get fined. So they are obsessed with making sure that the process is delivering to the letter. And an example in our sector, I think, does a process very well, is someone like Anytime Fitness, who sort of have a franchise network, and they use mystery shopping and insight to ensure each franchisee is delivering to the brand and to the and delivering that process the same every time. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's some of the reasons why perhaps people would be following these programs.
Yeah. So that process is important, and I've seen that. I'm always pleased when if I'm working with a franchise company to find out that Proinsight are already working there, or if not, to find out if they should, because franchisees often want to see that process followed. But as you say, it's not just process. It is that that brand awareness, and increasingly now compliance. And how does the leisure sector compare? You alluded to it a little bit with some different examples, but you do a lot of comparison, do a lot of benchmarking, don't you? Is leisure on the up? Are we seeing it improve over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think, we've been measuring the leisure sector for about 6 years, and we've been measuring other sectors, those other 10 sectors that I spoke about, probably for the last 2 or 3. And there's big growth in our business in those other sectors, but it's nice that the more we're growing in other sectors, the more we can sort of directly relate what we do in our sector to, and I say our sectors, I still feel very much as our heart. But what we are seeing, particularly in the digital age, is that other sectors, you know, the likes of Mercedes, BMW, to name a few, and Optical Express, we've been working with more recently. If you inquire, digital inquiry through any one of their websites, they have sort of all of those brands will have an hour follow-up time. So they'd be expecting someone in their business to respond back, whether that's a call back, whether it's an email back, whatever the journey is, within an hour. And I don't know about you guys, but I sort of, whenever I inquire about anything, I always expect a response back pretty quickly. I'm not, you know, just not going to wait days for that. Whereas our sector, although we have seen improvements, I think we struggle a little bit with hourly responses, mainly because of the way we're resourced, I think, and departments and things like that. You know, I'm sure Andy would have some comments on that, but we tend to struggle with getting that you know, quality of information back to the customer in a reasonable time frame, I think.
Yeah. I think we'll probably come back onto that one as well. There is a question from the floor already. I will come to that in a minute. Thank you from anonymous attendee. But before we get to that, let's let Paul say a few words. So you're a fan of open questions and really listening to customers, Paul. Yeah. I know, as am I. But many companies shy away from this, don't they? Perhaps it's difficult to analyse the open questions. Maybe they don't want to hear the answer to an open question. But what does listening really look like in your book or in your world?
Yeah, and I think listening is a really good word, because what a lot of businesses, not just leisure operators, do is they ask. So they ask questions, but they don't do the other two bits of what you talked about, Guy, in terms of responding back with here's what we've heard, and then showing that they've actually done something about it. So for me, listening is really important in terms of getting that sort of two-way flow going. And I think it's hard because for me, there's kind of 5 bits as a who, what, when, where, why aspect to it that people don't get. And that I'll come to the why last, because I think that's where the challenge is. So people need to think about who they're getting feedback from. And it's not just from members. It needs to be from lapsed members and prospects, as you talked about, hence things like the mystery shopping, bringing in the prospects. Andy, you talked about getting feedback in as well from cancelled members, but also from employees, because employee engagement, employee experience is so tightly linked to customer engagement and customer experience, but they're usually treated completely differently. So employees, staff, contractors, workforce, instructors, if they're asked for feedback, it's usually more on the kind of the HR policy side of things. And then customers are asked about their experience, and nobody's collecting up in a scalable, consistent way. How are our employees seeing the customer experience, and what can we learn from that, and what can we do to help them deliver a better experience? So I think you've got to start off with who and make sure you're collecting insights from all the right places. Then you've got to think about when you ask for it. So it needs to be along all points of the customer journey. So the days of, Andy talks about it, the sort of quarterly, the half yearly, the yearly, those big set piece surveys that people hate setting up, people hate analysing, and customers hate filling in. Those are 3 great reasons for not doing it anymore. And actually, if you get down to the point of getting this daily feedback all the time, then what you get is a much richer body of insight coming in. Because if you're asking people and giving them the ability to feedback when they've got something to say, they'll give you the details. So they won't just say, oh, cleanliness is terrible. They'll actually say, when I was in the changing rooms, this was dirty or that was dirty. And because you've got a timestamp on that, you can start to build a picture that says, this is really interesting. We get a spike in cleanliness related comments on a Monday afternoon. Let's go do something about it. Let's go and see what's happening. So I think you've got to think about who, you've got to think about when. You've then got to think about where you listen to this. And we've talked about Twitter, we've talked about mystery shopping, surveys, feedback forms. Again, it's about sort of helping people share through all of these different mechanisms. So survey responses, maybe 30,000 aside, they're quite low. We did see in lockdown a general boost in email survey responses, but still not everyone's going to reply. But they might share on Twitter, they might share on a Google review, they might share on a feedback survey. So thinking about what are all those places to capture, and again, pulling it all in is really important. And then you can start to think about the why. And the why for me is sort of why listen and why it's hard. Why listen we've talked about, because then you can start driving continuous improvement and making sure that the brand experience that you're positioning yourselves as having is equal to the brand experience that you're actually delivering, exactly what David just talked about. Why it's hard, I think, is because when you start particularly asking open questions, you give people that opportunity to step forward and tell you what's really on their mind. You no longer, closed questions for me, I get sort of very fired up about closed questions, because immediately it's the business applying, here's what I think you're going to tell us. Which one of these things is it? Or worse, it's these are the things we want to hear about. Which one do you want to talk about? When you ask an open question, you let go of control of the conversation. The members, the employees can take it anywhere they want to. You've then got to do something with that. You've opened up the door. There is an expectation that you will respond. And that's hard. And it's hard because in the old world of survey analysis, before tools like My Customer Lens, you had to analyze all that text manually. And that takes time. It's not fun. It's inconsistent. You know, we've all done it. We don't enjoy doing it. So that's hard. And then there's the time lag on that. So people don't scale it. They don't want to ask open questions because they know what's going to happen in return. Whereas you can get instant graphs of quantitative data. It's not right, but it's instant. So I think that's why people avoid doing it. It's because it creates a commitment. We've got to do something with this. And sometimes it's an inconvenient truth when you actually open it up and ask customers what they really think. They might not tell you exactly what they want. They'll tell you some great stuff you don't notice, but they might also tell you some things that maybe you didn't want them to notice. So I think that's the real challenge with it, but it's also the beauty is there's huge golden nuggets in those text comments, but you've got to be prepared to go in and look. And if you're trying to do it manually, it just doesn't work.
Which means that people then stop asking. You know, it's that classic old customer feedback card. Oh, there's only 5 of them in the slot because that's how many we can process each month, or worse.
And the really interesting thing is that Andy alluded to it, that the words give you context. Without that, the business is having to make assumptions about why the score is what it is. Now, that's comfortable for some managers. I might upset a few people by saying this, but actually people are happy going, I can interpret these results in the way that I want. Oh, they've gone up. That must have been because we did something well. They've gone down. Maybe it wasn't our fault and it was somebody else's. It's the reason why other is usually the top mark in a levers survey, because the options in levers surveys are not really what customers want to tell you. But they're the things that businesses can kind of go, that's all right, that's not really our fault. So I think, really getting into that context and going, actually, we want to learn. So let's make sure we ask an NPS, we look at the text and we see why somebody's given us a 5, a 6, a 7, a 9, a 10. Becomes really important.
Yeah, because also, so just to recap your answer, listening, if you're asking open questions, then you better be listening.
Yeah.
And you want to be listening. So ask open questions in a nutshell. But also, I think, and we've seen this with research that we've done together with My Customer Lens GGFit. You'll get people giving a 9 or a 10, so positive net promoter score. But then there's gold dust in there. In the same way, there's people that say in a detractor score that they will tell you how to improve it, or they might even cite a great instructor who did a good job. That if it hadn't been for them, it would have been a 1. But I've given you a 7, so it's no good just having a 7, which I think probably brings it back full circle to what Andy was saying. We're not knocking net promoter at all, but the good questions are that what did you have a good experience? Well, what just open, so to open it up a little bit now, what are the best questions to ask? Andy, I think you alluded to the best one you have earlier on.
Always we relate to the journey, so they're questions about the customer, not ourselves. So I'm a fan of net promoter, but it is a little bit sort of centered around the business. What do you think of us? We just follow the journey through on whatever we want to ask, and open questions. We will give you an opportunity to shape it with a strongly agree or disagree, but we will always ask why. So our surveys are full of verbatim opportunities. So if you say, I don't know, I don't like the way your swim timetables work, we will say, please let us know why, and then we can feed that back to a supplier. So ours are very related to things we know the customer has enjoyed, and things that we know will relate to their experience, and that we can actually actively go and improve is probably the best way of looking at it. And to pick up on Paul's point, the the verbatim, we always ask customers at the end, do you mind us using this in marketing? We'll only use your first name, your site and your comments. And I think it's 70% of customers say, no worries, crack on. So especially in the world we're in now, we've done a lot of work to, keep customers reassured about what to expect when they come in our centres. But the next level of this is to say, well, you've heard it from us, but now let's hear it from the people who've been in for the last 3 weeks. And, the positivity we've had by putting in place what customers want and then asking them, did we deliver on our promises, are just a wealth of thanks and reassurance around what is in place. At a tricky time, we've probably delivered the best customer experience we've ever done in my time with leisure. So.
Yeah, which goes back to the sharing point, right? I mean, in the new sharing society, by sharing I mean social media, not so much caring sharing, but if someone's written an amazing testimonial for you there, you don't want to have to go back to them and ask them again if it's all right if you share that. You need to capture that in the same place, right?
No, exactly. Yeah.
Paul, by the way, Paul is still with us. He's just been told by Boris to go out for his daily activity. So or was it might have been Nicola actually, because he's up north. So he is still here to answer questions. His video has just gone offline. What about questions that people?
Yeah, I confirm I'm still here.
There you go. Questions that people don't ask that maybe they should. I'm thinking, David, about some of the research that you just chose to do during lockdown about digital fitness, which was fascinating. But more recently, there's been something about membership sales and the fact that some of the clients or other sites that you digitally surveyed or looked at weren't doing much selling at the moment. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, look, we wanted to understand what was going on out there. We were constantly being told by clients that sort of some clients out there aren't sort of selling, and that was a sort of a bit of a worry for me and the team. So we started to sort of go out to all of the UK's leading operators and small operators, about 100 operators. We sort of sent a digital inquiry into, and I guess the first thing that we found was that only 43% were dealt with within 7 days. So that would imply that sort of over half we didn't get a response within 7 days. So it backs up my point earlier about perhaps if the other sectors are looking at an hourly response, and yet we're struggling with sort of 50% getting back to people within 7 days. That's a bit of a concern. But then, so irrespective of whether they replied or not, we went on their website for the ones that didn't respond to sort of look at who was selling, who wasn't, because it's pretty obvious that people are prioritising safety, which absolutely right. But if you look at some of the news out there from UK Active and Community Leisure UK, there's sort of they're suggesting that half of the UK's leisure centres may not be here next year. And yet, so what are these organisations sort of doing about that? And we found that 22% of operators weren't even selling, and most of those operators were in the local authority, trust sector, and the emails were bouncing back saying, "Look, we're just not selling at the moment. We'll come back to you when we start selling." I guess I found that a little bit, perhaps a bit disturbing and strange that we're not doing that. And then we went a bit stage further and started to ask about offers and incentives to join in August, because quite clearly, like every other sector after COVID, we've got to get moving again. And if you think about what the hospitality sector's done, in that they've got Eat Out to Help Out now, or have had to sort of improve consumer confidence, and look at how the change in pretty much everyone I know has gone out and had some kind of meal out through August and taken part in that campaign. Yet, sort of in our sector, we found that less. I think it was something like 20, half the organisation surveyed were doing some kind of incentive or some kind of campaign, which is again a bit disturbing, considering there's lots of campaigns out there, again provided by UK Active, Alliance, to name a few that develop some campaigns. And I just think there's such an opportunity there, and I think our sector needs to sort of take advantage of some of those tools that are being provided, perhaps. Yeah,
I'm sure that all 100 places centres will be open in a year's time, Andy. But what's just quickly in terms of selling memberships? I know you guys are, because you're around me.
Selling. I think our challenge always was you want to sell, but you want to position it very carefully with all of the members that stayed suspended throughout. So there's, you can talk around loyalty. We don't know anyone else's stats, but we think we did a very good job of keeping people with free suspensions in place very early on. And we worked really hard when we reopened to, customers told us in the survey that they want as much notice as possible. So we worked really hard to get them at least 10 days notice before reopening where you can suspend. And we worked equally as hard to make sure the timetables were available. So actually, if you wanted to make a conscious decision, you could see exactly what you could book, and you could book it right there and then. So I think we were definitely selling, but we were probably a bit more subtle in terms of winning back some of the cancelled customers. And I think we were just a little bit delicate with, for all of those thousands of customers that stayed with us, we thought it would be a little bit sort of discourteous to see, I don't know, 12 months for the price of 7 or something like that when they walked in. So there's a balance there. But yeah, I would definitely consider us selling, and we're in the process of turning back on our mystery shop, and we have some digital measures. When it's a win back in the digital campaign, we use things like Tag Manager and various digital mechanisms to know about basket conversions and any dropout in the online journey. So it's about insight. It's just a slightly different way of doing it. But yeah, it's a delicate balance, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So I can ask a bunch more questions. I could keep going. We won't keep going beyond 3. Don't worry. But the one we've got from the floor is, how can we work together to gain feedback from current and potential participants? So this feels like me to be a bit of a sales question. Let's just bring Paul back in. How can we work together to get feedback from current and potential participants, Paul?
I think the first thing is trying to get some consistency around questioning, notwithstanding what Andy talked about earlier, that actually the ability of mixing up your questions and asking questions that are relevant to the moment and the business is really important. But actually, one of the things I see is that businesses all want to ask their questions in slightly different ways, often within a business, much less across businesses, which makes it really hard to compare. So I think if, as a sector, we want to start really learning from our customers and from the broader context of the market, we need to get better at asking consistent questions, so that we can then start benchmarking across different types of operators. So here's what customers across all the budget value gyms are telling us. This is what they value, this is what they don't. Across the boutique sector, this is why people are being attracted to it, this is why people are moving away. And I think if we can start to build that, it's going to help every operator to put their own insights in a broader context. And I think that makes a really strong case then for, Andy, I'm absolutely stealing your insight, not instinct phrase. But I think that really helps managers to get that on the table and say, look, here we've got this insight and here's what it means, because we can't hide away from these numbers because 20 of our competitors have got different numbers. I mean, David, you must see this across your mystery shopping, that ability to give people context because you're looking at the same things in similar ways, must be really powerful for them.
Yeah, we're doing more and more, going back to your point about different types of questions, more and more of our clients now are moving away from, yes, no type questions or 1 to 10 type questions and looking for much more around thoughts and feelings and how did that experience make you feel? It is becoming more and more apparent. And again, going back to one of the things Andy was talking about, we when we're designing surveys with our clients, we talk a lot about killer questions, so questions that are sort of absolutely business critical and are sort of, I jotted down a couple of what I consider awesome questions that so a couple of brands are working with. So if you're not already asking these are ones sort of to just throw into the mix. So we do a lot of work with Hollywood Bowl. And I guess they're competing for the same leisure time as the average swimming pool, and lots of you that are listening to this, and they're no longer content with just delivering an average service or a good service. What they're looking for is striving to provide sort of awesome experiences. And what I mean by that is sort of they want their team, maybe not quite so much at the moment, but to go up and sort of, if they see someone do a strike, a little kid do a strike, it's like high-fiving. If they've got extra, they put some extra chips in the grill, then they give an extra portion of chips. If someone walks in for the first time, set up the game for them. It's sort of going over and above, and they incentivize that and ask a question. And I think Andy was saying the same, that more and more organisations are looking for awesome team members that provide an awesome service and try and document that. And then, David Lloyd asked the same question, and at the end of the year, the COO, we provide him with all the stories behind each one. He picks out the best story, and they get a trip to Dubai. So there's sort of real incentive behind these questions. They've got real weight, and in their survey form, they're almost sort of worth more points, so to speak, than I don't know, some of the basic questions that we're seeing. Another great question I just wanted to get in, because I think it's really important, it's often forgotten, is the value of sense of belonging. So, feeling that it's your club or your centre, and David Lloyd score every time someone walks in and actually, there's a acknowledgement or a hello, and then every time they leave, they get a goodbye. And those two scores are placed so high in terms of importance. They're sort of right at the very top, because they know that if they get those kind of couple of things right, that drives loyalty, that drives this sense of belonging, which, in turn, we've increased the hello and goodbyes by 6%. Doesn't sound a lot, but a massive difference across their business. Increases, usage in the first month, and therefore increases longevity of members. So they're a couple of sort of what I would define as killer questions that, if you're not already asking that, even if it's not mystery shopping, it's still customer surveys. It's still the same sort of principle. Yeah.
Okay, great. And in terms of
I'd jump in on that comment as well. Just around asking about emotions. So the research work that we've done both across leisure trusts, and now we're doing it across governing bodies with Sporting England as well. And what's driving people's behaviour is emotions. It's fear, it's trust, it's anticipation, and joy. And you really can't discover that with closed questions unless you start asking some very, very specific ones. But it's so important when we're looking at what are the drivers of whether or not people want to come back. It's not about demographics. It's not, in most cases, even about how often they were coming along before lockdown. It's about their mindset and how they're feeling about the wider sort of COVID related thing. And then once they come back, it's about how the experience makes them feel. Do they trust the environment? And actually, in many cases, what we're seeing is people trust themselves, don't trust other members. So, and this isn't a leisure industry thing, this is a society thing at the moment, but this feeling of the guidelines are in place, but can I trust other people? And I think being able to ask that and really discover when that's bubbling up, and then working out when members are telling the opposite story about how much they trust other members and how they've got people working together and how they're seeing members cleaning up after them or helping each other. Those are the stories you want to be able to amplify and share. So Andy, you talked about that sort of the social proof and the importance of people engaging with each other and sharing the positive stories. And I think a lot of that comes from the open questions. And when you start asking about feelings, you can learn what's holding people back, and you can hear what they're excited about. And then you can start communicating with empathy. So you start to reflect the same words in your communications. So then you really sort of start to connect with people.
And that feelings point it resonates with everything, whether that's sales and mystery shopping. It's the feeling. It's not about reeling off 10 needs analysis questions. It's actually then reacting to the answers and showing a bit of empathy, and perhaps you can ask a couple less, as long as you're the individual that really cares about the individual's goals. And I think member etiquette, we never really touch upon it in our normal surveys, but during the lockdown survey, we said, what was it that was really concerning you about your return to site? And obviously, apart from cleanliness and hygiene, other members behaving or following the rules was a key one. So we now ask about that in subsequent surveys, and lo and behold, it's perhaps the one area that we really need to focus on. And we understand it's very difficult for teams. You're asked to manage something that is a little bit out of your comfort zone, but we're aware as a business we need to support them in making those decisions. And one member coming up to you and saying that member over there isn't doing such and such doesn't always place you in a comfortable position, but because you're trying to sort of keep two parties happy, one of which is asking you to probably have a sterner word with another individual. And it's not easy, but at least you know the size of the problem, and you can relate it to some actions in the business that will help the teams.
Yeah, 100%. And you've got you mentioned earlier on, Andy, about members who were cancelling. So I'm still drilling down into this question a little bit, asking about getting feedback from current. We've covered that a lot, but potential participants. In terms of people who haven't joined yet or haven't even heard of places, I think there might be something you're doing on that. Yeah,
there is. So at the moment, the holy grail for customer experience is exactly that: is I can very easily contact all of our customers via text and email and what have you, because I've got their details. And even those who are cancelled, you know, I have their details, and some within the first couple of months of their relationship ending, some rights within the law to contact with privacy guys let me. You know, David's work in Mystery Shop is a start in understanding, you know, at least you know they're in the building, but you do understand that they're actually the reasons why they wouldn't join you as a member. So that's the start of understanding that. But what we'll introduce in the next couple of months is a customer panel. So there's a customer panel for our members, which is kind of, we're really, you know, we're loving the results of the surveys. We're really, you know, we buy into the fact we are a community business. There is a higher level of engagement in this business. In other businesses I've worked in, which was telecom, you don't have as much of a relationship with your phone provider as you do with your local leisure centre who reinvests in facilities. So we play to that a little bit. But the panel will be 2 panels, one of which will be our members, so we can fire them questions, we can get videos from them. It's a lot more modern. It's not just a survey. We can send them, you know, exclusives in terms of this is what our website will look like. What do you think to that? Here's 3 options. Which do you prefer? What sort of works for you? So that's very engaging and a lot more instant and spontaneous, and it's very modern. But the supplier will also offer us all the other panelists from their other panels that aren't our members. So then we can ask them the same questions or different questions to say, what is it that, you know, would get you active? If you were to be active, why would you consider us or not consider us? And that for me is the holy grail. And that's where, you know, you get to the figures on the percentage of the large percentage of the nation that are inactive. Well, actually, let's go and talk to some of them, because they are a far harder audience to understand and they're a far harder audience to reach. But that's the start of doing something there and documenting that kind of, you know, the concerns. Who is it you'd consider? Why aren't you considering anything? And that's quite an interesting sort of play as well. So
yeah, and that, I mean, it comes back to the whole place's ethos. But as you say, it's a much bigger. You know, we've got 15-20% at a push of the population coming to, you know, or taking up gym memberships. You know, if we include going for a swim and all those good things. But yeah, there's a lot more people out there who are inactive who we currently struggle to touch, and those are absolutely the people that you want to be reaching out to, and whether it's providing a place for or providing activity for, it's really key, isn't it? In terms of getting actionable insights, what are the tricks or tips that you would give the audience? And this is another one of my questions. So if there are any more from the floor, please fire them in. We'll get to them in a minute. But we've collected these insights in lots of different ways. What are the best ways of making sure that we can turn the insights into actions? Does anyone want to pick that up first of all?
Yeah, I don't mind having a stab at it, and then someone else can sort of chip in. I think, but the first thing is making sure that the information is getting to the right people. I think, particularly with our mystery shop programs, we need to make sure that the person, the general manager of that location that's just had the mystery shop, is receiving that information pretty quickly, and it's not going to someone at head office and then sort of taking weeks to get down. So we always sort of, you know, set our programs up so they get hit all the key people at the same time. We've even got sort of tactics so that if senior managers don't want every mystery shop because it clogs up their inbox, they can have the ones that are below 50% and above 90%, so they get in the right thing. I think I use Gymbox as a good example there, but Mark, the CEO there, ever since we've been working with him, he watches every single mystery shop. He watches every single video. And that's sort of why that business is always scoring sort of 95%, because he is so involved in, and he puts it at the very top of his sort of things to do, I suppose. And it sits on the board. It sits at the board level. You know, other organisations that put it as part of their management balanced scorecard and things like that. It tends to be much more embedded, and they tend to see much better results as a result of sort of having that at the top table and on manager balanced scorecard. So rather than just sort of information flowing in for 3 months and thinking things are going to change, they're not going to change unless you do anything with it and about it. And that takes time. You know, receiving a mystery shop, you've got to, or a survey, whatever it might be, you've got to read and understand what that information is telling you, and then you've got to work out who it was, and then have that conversation, both good and bad. And that all takes management time. So there's got to be a sort of pretty compelling reason why you've got to do that. Mm-hmm. So they're just a couple of examples of some organisations that do some good things with it, I think.
Yeah, really good.
I would say in there, ownership is the big thing. Whether it's an individual question, it's isolating who is the owner. If you ask it, you've got to have a view to improve it, and I think you have to be holistic. So whether that's a supplier, like you say, or frontline teams, or maybe a policy, maybe the culture of the business. We're sort of investing quite a lot in internal communications at the moment, just to keep everyone on the same page. We think we can be better at it, and therefore we think that will convey to a quicker and friendlier experience on site. A lot of work to be done on sort of empowering the teams as well. But I think as long as you've got specific owners, and it's hard work, surveys should produce hard work for a business. If you're just going to document a score, you're missing the point. But if you sort of can channel that into projects, then you can't solve everything. But if you know the priorities and say these are our top 5, they need addressing for these reasons, and then the survey becomes very, very small beer, or whatever feedback you're using, because you're going to make a massive dent on your retention or whatever it may be by solving these things. So I think ownership is the thing, and I think some teams think of surveys as we're just isolating the teams, but if you start looking at the questions or whatever you're asking your customer panels or shoppers or what have you, it's to actually drive that and represent the teams. A lot of the frontline teams, their top 5 things for us to improve probably marry up pretty closely with what the customers want, because they cause angst on site. They're harder questions to answer. So even if you don't have a survey, if you listen to your frontline teams, you're not a million miles off what's top of your customers list. And then the key there is work for a business that keeps it at the top of the list, and that's from the frontline teams, answering the questions to the customers through to the board level, knowing that the customer stat